right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm thankful to the Ribbono Shel Olam that I did not sit through Joe Biden's speech last night. I heard on the radio this morning that President Trump was commenting on the speech and that he listened to it, and I can't imagine the pain and suffering that President Trump had to endure listening to this man talk. And I'm aware of some of the things that he said. This was an extremely radical speech from all the reports that I've heard. And the most, I guess, controversial thing that he said was that the events of January 6th were the greatest attack on American democracy since the Civil War. There's a few problems with that. Obviously, there was September 11th, there was Pearl Harbor, there was the Kennedy assassination, McKinley's assassination, Garfield's assassination. All of these, right, were attacks on American democracy since the Civil War. A few idiots taking selfies. When the Capitol Police pushed them in there, that's an attack on the democracy. And also, how was the Civil War itself an attack on our democracy in any fashion? I've heard, Confederates who were all Democrats feel that President Lincoln, who was the first Republican president, was attacking their democratic rights, perhaps. Is Joe Biden, who is a protege of Senator Byrd, who was a leader in the KKK, is Joe Biden of the thought that the Civil War was the war of northern aggression? Is that why he sees the Civil War as an attack on democracy? Perhaps. I think that's the dog whistle that Biden is making here. Or is he admitting that it's not the dummies with horns on their heads taking selfies in the Capitol that was the attack on our democracy, but rather the fact that the Congress and the Senate accepted the illegitimate votes of the Electoral College that were gained in an unconstitutional manner, with or without voter fraud. I know you're not allowed to talk about voter fraud on YouTube, but it wasn't. Even if there was no fraud, the fact that the voting laws were changed without the permission of the legislatures of the various states, in various states, they changed the laws by executive fiat or by judicial fiat, rather than by the method that the Constitution insists that it has to be like this. So that was an attack on our democracy, for sure. The fact that we weren't even afforded the chance to review this the way that Ted Cruz asked, that we should, restore the confidence that people had in the system and make a review. That was an attack on our democracy. Also, the fact of the matter is, America is not a democracy. It's a republic with some democratic elements. But democracy is not what we're aiming for here, because democracy does not respect the rights of the minority. And that's why we have these two parties, the Democratic Party, which is the party that inspired the Nazi Party, the party that, and yet the Nazis thought that the Democrats were too racist for them because the Democrats had what was called the one-drop rule, that even one drop of black blood made someone black, according to the Democrats, and so the Nazis said, they can't go that far back. They're going to have to say, when they made the Nuremberg laws, they're going to have to say, well, I think, what was it, 2 generations back, something like that, was how they developed their laws. And again, the Democrats care about one thing, and that's demographics. That's why they're Democrats, as opposed to the Republicans, whose raison d'etre as a party is to protect the rights of the minority against the tyranny of a democratically elected majority, to ensure that the Constitution is here to protect minorities, and the most important minority is the minority of one, as we've said many times, from the tyranny of the majority. And that's why we have a Constitution, to protect us from the democracy, really, from the possible tyranny of democracy. And maybe that's what he's talking about here, that he is upset that democracy was undermined in the Civil War, that that we actually fought a civil war to protect black people from Democrats, and that's why we fought a civil war. And I'm sure Joe Biden would have been happier, because he bragged about how his state, Delaware, is a slave state. I'm sure that he's upset that a Republican freed the slaves, and that's why the Democrats, after the Civil War, tried so much to re-enslave the blacks with their Jim Crow laws and so forth, all made by Democrats. And then they go and make this lie that the parties switched, when that never happened. And that's what we got here, meaning his own Senator Byrd, his own mentor and Hillary Clinton's mentor, remained a Democrat all throughout his life, because the Democrat Party is the party of the KKK to this very day. And so now what the Democrats do is they have the KKK with a new hood on, which is BLM, and the discussion is often between the BLM organization, the BLM statement, do Black Lives Matter, and is this a statement that we have to discuss, and then they discuss as to whether or not we should just say all lives matter. And the argument against saying all lives matter, I believe, is a good argument, because not all lives are not being threatened in the way that black lives are being threatened. And so that's why we have to say the words Black Lives Matter. And I agree with that sentiment. But I disagree with who are the ones who are threatening black lives. The ones who are threatening the black lives are the Democrats. Always have and always will be. And the fact that they kept that name after the Civil War and after the Civil Rights Act, etc., it makes no sense. Can you imagine the Nazis still called themselves Nazis after World War II, and then went and said that the people who fought them are now the real racists, and they're not racists anymore? Do you realize how ridiculous that is? That's exactly what the Democrats did. And in a certain sense, Lincoln is to blame by taking Johnson on as a vice president. He thought it would unify the nation. And Johnson, to his credit, Andrew Johnson, to his credit, had, loyalty to the Union. And he was an interesting character. Definitely, somebody worthy of study, and in certain ways, as an individual, an inspirational person, that he went from illiteracy to the presidency. But still, he was, in the end, a Democrat. And that is why Reconstruction was such a failure. If 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 Lincoln's successor would have been a Republican, I think this country would look much, much different. And I think, we would not have this continued legacy of the Democrat Party, and they would have gone the way of the Whigs and various other parties that went extinct, as they well should have after the Civil War, and really before that. I mean, someone like Andrew Jackson, a horrible racist and a Democrat. That's the history of the Democrat Party, and then continuing to this day with their sacrament of eugenics and lynching black babies in the womb with the very racist Planned Parenthood organization. As much as they want to lie that the party's flipped and this and that, it's not true. It's simply not true. Because watch Kayvon's video. There's a comedian, Kayvon, but it's not a comedy video. It's a serious video about who is really racist, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And he conclusively proves that Joe Biden is at least the more racist of the two. But the truth of the matter is, like President Trump often said many times publicly, he's the least racist person. And then what do the racist, critical race theorists who call themselves anti-racist, when they're actually very clearly racist, what do they say? Oh, if someone says that you're not racist, that means you're racist. You realize how stupid that is? That's the world that the left wants us to live in. And that's what we have to reject. They accused President Trump of dog whistles, but you had Joe Biden with bugles announcing his racism, saying stuff like, you ain't black, and are you a junkie, and you can't work in a 7-Eleven if you don't have a slight Indian accent. Actually, he said you can't go into a 7-Eleven. That doesn't even make any sense. What else he said? Indians are taking over America, including his vice president. He said, that the black community is not diverse. Unlike the black community, the Hispanic community is very diverse. But where did the black community come in there in his discussion of the Hispanic community, except just that he's talking about his racism? Or even if you want to get into dog whistles, I would say, when he said, do I look like a socialist? I beat the socialists. I think that was a veiled anti-Semitic comment, because what does a socialist look like? And in the eyes of the anti-Semite, a socialist looks like a Jew with a hook nose, even though Bernie Sanders doesn't have a hook nose. But the fact that he said, I beat the socialists, and do I look like a socialist? That's the way that the anti-Semites, and I don't like that term anti-Semite or anti-Semitism, but this is anti-Semitism, because it's racial as opposed to religious. And I don't have, and my feeling is that we should focus as a Jewish community on the religious persecution of Jews, as opposed to accidents of birth, and using accidents of birth as some kind of a cover for the evil done by socialists. I think the socialists are evil. I think Bernie Sanders is an evil man. I think George Soros is an evil man. I think, a lot of these people, and I don't believe in this racist nonsense of giving someone some kind of giving someone like it's no big deal. They're giving them a pass just because they claim some kind of a Jewish ancestry or Jewish identity, but they don't keep Shabbos, they don't keep kosher. The Shulchan Aruch says very plainly, Mechal Shabbos for Hesya, Harihu K'goy L'chol Davar, that Akim L'chol Davar, that a Jew who violates the Sabbath publicly, has no regard for our faith, is considered to be a heathen. He's not considered to be part of the Jewish community. And these atheism, the Rambam says, Maimonides says, is worse than idolatry. And so these atheists like George Soros and Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer and all these guys, they don't deserve respect just because they happen to be born Jewish. That's just racism if someone believes that. So that's but that's the case that we have here. And you have so many leftists, all they care about are accidents of birth, skin color, gender, things like that, and other identity politic issues, because they want to put people into groups to have demographics and voting blocks, as opposed to appealing to the individual as an individual. So that's the story. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. We'll see you later.